Hello, third graders. All right, so I had to be in a quiet room in my house, so we're in my closet because it's very noisy in my house. So we're on chapter 13, Shelter for $1. Pearl grabbed the flyer from Victoria's hand. Bye-bye, bugs. Are creepy crawlies bugging you? Got that there. So remember, the exterminator, the vacuumnator is coming. Our aerodynamically designed vacuuminator will suck those biting beasts right out of your bed, hair, and house forever. Call 1-555-Bug-Guys. Ben ran to her side, her cheeks red from pushing his way through the crowd. What is it? It's just like the flyer we found at the hospital, Pearl said, waving it frantically in his face. They're on their way. Here? Ben asked. Someone has to clean up the mess Pearl has made. Mrs. Mulberry smiled proudly. The exterminators will exterminate those vicious little beasts, and Buttonville will once again be killer bee-free town. But they're not killer bees, Pearl insisted. She wanted to grab that megaphone and talk some sense into everyone. I know I told Victoria that I'd caught a killer bee, but that wasn't the whole truth. They're just regular bees. And they're not going to hurt anyone. Well, they might bite, but it's only a problem if you're allergic and... She looked pleadingly at Ben, hoping he'd step in. Ben opened his mouth, ready to come up with some sort of brilliant story, but Mrs. Mulberry wasn't going to let him put a damper on her moment of importance. She loved being the center of attention. With the megaphone pressed to her mouth, Mrs. Mulberry said, Never mind your excuses, Pearl. Those bugs are out of control, and we aren't safe until they're caught and destroyed. The crowd murmured in agreement. While Officer Millie began wrestling Mrs. Mulberry for possession of the megaphone, Victoria sneered at Pearl. You're lucky I'm not allergic to killer bees, or my mom would sue you for sure. Pearl sneered back. Then, through clenched teeth, she said, I wish you'd turn into a kiwi jelly bean, and then you'd be sorry. What's that supposed to mean? Victoria asked. But there was no time for an explanation, or for Pearl to imagine Victoria as a big fat piece of edible candy, because once again, screaming filled the air. The swarm had flown from the Food for Less market and was now circling the town hall's clock tower. Then it dove down the town hall's chimney. Keep calm, Officer Millie said as she yanked the megaphone from Mrs. Mulberry's grabby hands. Until the exterminator arrives, I'm ordering everyone to seek shelter at home. Close your windows and doors and stay put until you hear the town hall bell. That will be the signal that it's safe to come out. The crowd began to disperse. We can't go home, Pearl told Ben. We have to catch the fairies before the exterminator gets them. If we could just find Tawanabeth. But Pearl wasn't able to finish her thought because her father had wrapped an arm around her shoulder and was leading her up the street. Come along, sweetie, he told her, tightening his grip. We need to get inside where it's safe. Grandpa Abe was standing next to Mrs. Pearl. He waved his cane. Ben, hurry. But, Dad, Ben and I have to do something, Pearl protested, trying to halt his progress by locking her knees. You and Ben can do something later, Mr. Pearl said, steering her into the dollar store. This is a very serious situation, and we all need to get off the street before the killer bees attack again. Then he turned to Grandpa Abe. Come on, come in. You'll be safe with us. Pearl stomped her foot. But we can't be locked in the store. We have to. Mrs. Petal shook her finger at her daughter. Don't you argue with your father. Those aren't honeybees. They are killers. Pearl groaned with frustration. If she hadn't signed that contract of secrecy, she could tell them the truth. Then everyone would stop freaking out and allow her and Ben to do their jobs. Mrs. Petal turned the dollar store sign to closed and was about to shut the door when Mrs. Mulberry and Victoria barged in. Well, why are you just standing there? Mrs. Mulberry complained. Lock that door before those beasts bite my daughter again. Mrs. Petal, who was always very polite, hesitated for a moment. She had enough run-ins with the Mulberrys to know that being locked in the store with them would most likely be an unpleasant experience. Wouldn't you be more comfortable in your home? She said, managing a sweet smile. It's too dangerous to walk all the way home, Mrs. Mulberry said. Besides, it's my duty to keep watch, in case anything needs to be reported to the authorities. She grabbed a pair of plastic binoculars from a bin and stepped into the display window. She didn't seem to care that it had taken the Petals half a day to create the lovely display. After pushing aside the picnic baskets, plastic dishes, and barbecue tongs, she plopped onto the picnic bench and proceeded to watch Main Street. And it's your duty to control your troublemaker daughter. I'm so sick of being called a troublemaker, Pearl whispered to Ben. With a sigh, Mrs. Petal closed the front door. Pearl clenched her fists with frustration. It was bad enough that the fairies were in danger of extermination, but now she and Ben were locked in a store with Victoria. If only the vacuuminator would work on a person. I'll make some tea, Mrs. Petal said, and she went upstairs to set the kettle on the stove. I take mine with 3 lumps of sugar, Mrs. Mulberry called. Then she shrieked, There they are! They've left Town Hall and they're flying down Main Street! While Victoria, Grandpa Abe, and Mr. Petal rushed to the window to watch the fairies, Pearl pulled Ben down aisle 2. They huddled in front of a stack of canned cheese spread. I don't care if I get grounded for 1,000,000 years, she whispered. We have to get out of here and find Tawana Beth. We have to warn her. How? Ben asked. Mrs. Mulberry is watching everything, and your dad is guarding the front door. I saw that dragon again. Victoria had followed them down the aisle. She took off her glasses, wiped the thick lenses on her shirt, and stuck them back onto her nose. And don't you tell me that I didn't, because I did. It flew right over my yard. Go away, Victoria. Ben and I are having a private conversation. About what? That's none of your beeswax. Pearl felt a bit prickly. Maybe she was allergic to Victoria. That girl got under Pearl's skin like stinging needles. And for the last time, dragons aren't real. I saw it, and I saw both of you on its back, she smirked. Ben pointed at Victoria's glasses. Have you had your prescription checked? Because you're obviously seeing things, or maybe you're going mental. Victoria stuck out her upper lip. I'm not mental. That's a mean thing to say. Why can't you figure it out? Pearl said, clenching her teeth again. We don't want to talk to you. We never want to talk to you. Go away. Victoria winced as if those words had stung. For a millisecond, Pearl felt bad. She didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but then she reminded herself that there were hundreds of tiny lives at stake, and thus no time to feel bad. Besides, Victoria constantly said mean things to Pearl. It was part of our daily routine. Victoria, Mrs. Mulberry called from the display window. I've had a brilliant idea. I'm going to write about our situation for the upcoming issue of Welcome Wagon Monthly. Get some paper and a pen. Better do what your mom says, Pearl told her. Paper and pens are in aisle 1. Thank you, Mrs. Mulberry, Ben whispered as Victoria went to get the supplies. And while he and Pearl continued to huddle next to the cheese spread, trying to hatch a plan, Mrs. Mulberry dictated to her daughter, who joined her in the front window. It was a dark and stormy day when we found ourselves trapped, Mrs. Mulberry began, her voice filled with drama. The dollar store, a wasteland of useless objects, had become our only shelter from an invading army of vicious insects that were determined to prey on our flesh. With no food or water to sustain us, Victoria and I grew weak. But I was determined to keep us alive. Impressive, Ben said. Sounds like one of my stories. Pearl rolled her eyes. We need to get out of here. What are we going to do? Tea is ready, Mrs. Petal called from the upstairs apartment. You got a little something to nosh? Grandpa Abe asked. All this excitement made me hungry. Sure, Mr. Petal told him. Then he led Grandpa Abe up the stairs. I can't leave my post, Mrs. Mulberry announced. Victoria, dear, bring Mummy a cup of tea. Victoria set the paper and pen aside and followed Grandpa Abe and Mr. Petal. Pearl took a deep, focused breath. With everyone upstairs and Mrs. Mulberry staring out the window, it was now or never. Come on, she whispered. She hurried to the back of the store, opened the basement door, and with Ben at her heels, quickly descended into Great Aunt Gladys's apartment. All right, Chapter 14, Ghost Town. It was warm in the basement, the air thick with the scent of mentholated arthritis rub and wiener dogs. Gladys certainly didn't appear to be worried about killer bees. She was fast asleep in her armchair, knitting needles on her lap. Sweetness and Light were asleep too, curled beneath knitted blankets on the couch. There was so much snoring going on that it was possible none of them had heard the police siren or screams for help. Because this was a basement apartment, the windows were set high in the walls. Pearl climbed onto a chair and pushed one of them open. Then she and Ben climbed out. The dogs didn't stir, nor did Aunt Gladys. Pearl quietly closed the window. Mrs. Mulberry said the swarm headed down Main Street. Let's go. In order to stay out of Mrs. Mulberry's line of sight, Pearl and Ben darted between the dollar store. Then they crossed Cherry Street, cut through the park, and hurried down First Street. Nearly out of breath, they peered down the corner of the bookstore. They peered around the corner of the bookstore. There was no sign of the swarm up or down Main Street. In fact, there was no sign of anything. The crowd was gone. The police car was gone. The door to the Buttonville Cinema stood wide open, as did the diner's door. The only sign of life was a flock of pigeons enjoying Maybelle's spilled popcorn. It looks like a ghost town, Pearl said as an empty soda cup rolled down the street. Ben wiped nervous sweat from his forehead. Maybe the fairies got enough sugar and went back to the hospital. Maybe. Pearl narrowed her eyes. What's that? A whining sound had arisen in the distance. She smiled. Is it? Yeah, it's the fairies, Ben said, his eyes widening. That high-pitched hum was definitely the swarm, but where was it coming from? Pearl and Ben turned in slow circles, scanning the nearby rooftops, the trees, the sky. But as they searched, another sound arose, a rhythmic chugging, and it came from the entrance to town, where Main Street joined the highway. Keeping well out of view, Pearl and Ben ran toward the sound. They stopped at a sign. Welcome to Buttonville, the nicest town on earth. The chugging grew louder. What is it? Pearl said, looking toward the highway. Ben poked her shoulder. It's Victoria. Don't be silly. Victoria's rude and annoying, but she doesn't sound like an engine. No, I mean, Victoria is right behind us. Pearl whipped around. Victoria's frizzy pigtails bounced as she rushed toward them. Pearl was so furious her face went as red as Victoria's overalls. What are you doing? Victoria skidded to a stop. How come you're out here? Officer Millie said we shouldn't go outside until the town hall bell rang. She put her hands on her hips. Are you going to meet the dragon? I want to meet it too. We're not meeting a dragon, Ben insisted. We're out here because... He paused for a moment, gathering a story. We're out here because I lost my inhaler, which I need in case I have an asthma attack. Asthma attacks can be very serious, and they can be brought on by stress. And this whole killer bee thing is very stressful. I'm sure Officer Millie would give us permission to search for it. That's why we're out here. I didn't know you used an inhaler, Pearl whispered in his ear. I don't, he whispered back. Pearl sighed with relief, happy that they didn't have to add an asthma attack to their growing list of things to worry about. Go away before you get in trouble, Pearl said. Victoria leaned against the welcome sign and folded her arms super tight. I'm not moving, and you can't make me. I want to meet the dragon. Oh, yeah? Pearl took a step toward her. What was she going to do? Pick her up and carry her? Why was Victoria always getting in the way? Why did she have to be such a pest? They stared at each other, steely-eyed. It was like an old Western movie where the bad guy and the good guy got ready to draw weapons. Except this was Buttonville, and the only weapon Pearl had was words. Anger welled and spewed out like a volcano. I hate you. 3 small words, when put together, were the most terrible Pearl had ever spoken. They echoed off the welcome sign. Victoria's arms fell to her side. She looked a bit stunned, as if someone tossed cold water in her face. Pearl took a step toward her. Gee, I didn't, Pearl started to say, but that chugging sound suddenly grew louder. Ben grabbed her arm. It's coming closer, he warned. Pearl whipped around. A black truck had turned off the highway and was speeding toward them. Its brightly painted logo said, "Bye-bye, bugs." Chapter 15, The Vacuumnator. All right, we're going to read that one too. Pearl ran into the middle of the road. Half her brain said, "Don't do it. You'll get flattened like a pancake." But the other half of her brain, the half with a louder voice, yelled, "Save the fairies!" "Pearl!" Ben hollered. He reached out to grab her, but he wasn't quick enough. Once she'd set her mind to something, Pearl operated on 100% pure determination. Her goal, keep the exterminator from reaching Buttonville. The truck barreled toward her. She couldn't see the driver's face through the dirty, bug-splotched windshield. Headlights flashed at her. A horn blasted its warning. Despite the looming danger, she stood her ground, waved her arms above her head, and shouted, "Stop!" The truck veered around her. Ben and Pearl jumped aside as the truck careened over the sidewalk. Brakes screeched, and the scent of burning rubber polluted the air. The truck came to a dead stop just inches from the Buttonville welcome sign. The engine sputtered, then went quiet. "I did it," Pearl thought, smiling at her accomplishment. But when the driver's head popped out the window and she saw the look on his face, she wanted to run in the other direction. "Hey, kid, what are you doing? Are you crazy?" The door flew open and the driver slid out. He was a very short man with thick arms like a weightlifter's. His overalls were blue and his name tag read Bug Guy. "Better not be any damage," he grumbled, adjusting the pair of safety glasses that sat on his forehead. He stomped around the truck, kicking the tires and looking for dents. Then he climbed onto a rear wheel and began to inspect an old contraption that sat in the trunk's bed. It looked like some kind of machine with a barrel-sized clear container, a bunch of switches and buttons, and a long vacuum tube. "The Vacuumnator," Ben whispered to Pearl. She nodded. "You have me to thank," Victoria said proudly. "I'm the one who called him. I'm saving the day." Pearl wanted to tell Victoria that she wasn't saving the day. She was totally ruining it. But Pearl kept that comment to herself. She still felt bad about having said those other mean words. Bug Guy seemed satisfied that nothing had been broken. He stepped off the wheel, wiped his hands on his overalls, and frowned at Pearl. "Do your parents know you're playing in the middle of the road?" "I wasn't playing," Pearl said. "I wanted to stop you. We don't need your help anymore." "But I'm supposed to catch some killer bees," Bug Guy said. "The killer bees are gone," Ben told him. "Huh?" Victoria put her hands on her hips. Sunlight glinted off her blue braces as she spoke. "But we just saw them on Main Street. What makes you think they're gone?" "We saw them leave," Pearl replied. Bug Eye reached into his pocket. "Don't be so sure. Killer bees are real good at hiding." He pulled out a green licorice rope and took a bite. Pearl's legs stiffened. Would the fairies smell the candy and come swarming? That would be the absolute worst thing that could happen. I wouldn't eat that if I were you." "Why not?" the Bug Guy asked. "Candy's not healthy," Ben said, stepping closer to the man. "It can cause diabetes and obesity and ringworm," Pearl added. Ben gave her a weird look. Yeah, and ringworm. Also, it can make you hyper, so you shouldn't eat it if you're driving or operating heavy equipment. What are you talking about? Bug Guy spoke. With his mouth full, this is a very special gluten-free, low-calorie licorice. It's practically good for you. Does it have sugar? Pearl asked. Of course it has sugar. Wouldn't taste good without sugar. He took another bite. Pearl and Ben looked at the sky, sunny and blue with no signs of churning clouds. Not yet, anyway. Victoria, in her usual snoopy way, had climbed onto the truck's tailgate and was peering into the back. How does this thing work? She asked. Bug Guy proudly puffed out his chest. Well, the vacuumator is my own invention. It's patent pending. He pointed to the glass barrel. That's for vermin containment and observation. Then he pointed to the hose. That's what sucks up the vermin. I've got all different sizes of nozzles. Got one big enough for rats and bats, and got one small enough for fleas. I even got one big enough for burglars. I figure police departments all over the world will want one. He showed her the end of the hose. But I put on the medium-sized nozzle, which should be just right for killer bees. And this here starts the suction. He pushed a button and the vacuumator started rumbling. I'll show you. He aimed the hose at a pebble. In a flash, the pebble disappeared and reappeared inside the canister. Pearl and Ben had inched forward to see what all the fuss was about. What do the other buttons do? Ben asked. That one is the off button, and that one spits the vermin back out. But that's only for relocation. He wouldn't want to relocate your swarm of bees. They'll have to be destroyed, of course, to make the world a safer place. Do you have a nozzle big enough for a dragon? Victoria asked. She beamed a wicked smile at Pearl. Killer bees and dragons? Bug Guy said with a snort. What kind of town is this? He took another bite of licorice. Pearl shuffled nervously. She'd never seen green licorice before. Although the sky was still clear, she was getting a very bad feeling. What flavor is that? She inquired. Kiwi, he replied. Both Ben and Pearl gasped. You want a piece? Grasping both ends of the rope, he stretched it until it broke. A fruity scent filled the air, followed by high-pitched humming. A small cloud appeared above the tree line, swirling and churning and heading straight for them. Killer bees! Victoria screamed. Bug Guy dropped his licorice. Push the button! Push the button! He hollered as he pulled the vacuum hose out of the truck. No, don't push the button, Pearl and Ben cried. But Victoria's stubby fingers were already reaching for it, and before Pearl and Ben could stop her, the vacuumator roared to life. Bug Guy slid his safety glasses over his eyes, raised the hose like a sword and hollered, Take cover! While Victoria crawled under the truck, Pearl lunged at the vacuumator and Ben lunged at Bug Guy. But their efforts were too late. The fairy swarm dive-bombed the kiwi-flavored licorice, and with swift aim, Bug Guy sucked them right out of the air. Got him, he shouted. Just as Pearl reached and pressed the off button, the engine shut down and the suction stopped. But it was too late. Got every last one of them. Bye-bye, bugs. Ben climbed into the back of the truck and peered into the canister. Pearl didn't want to look. What if the fairies were hurt? What if they were dead? She couldn't bear seeing such horror. She closed her eyes and grimaced, waiting for Ben to deliver the news. Are they? It looks like they're okay, he reported. Pearl almost burst into tears. She climbed in next to him. Indeed, the fairies were flying around inside the container. They seemed a bit dazed because they kept bumping into one another, but that was to be expected after what they'd been through. Do you see Tawana Beth? There she is, Ben said, pressing a finger to the glass. Tawana Beth had separated from the swarm and was waving and yelling at the apprentices, but without a creature calculator, they had no idea what she was saying. How do we get them out of there? Pearl whispered. The glass containment didn't have a lid or an opening other than the one of the vacuum hose, which was attached with a metal ring and bolts. If we push the relocation button, the fairies will shoot back out, Ben suggested. Pearl looked over her shoulder at Bug Guy, who was wiping dirt from his licorice pieces. But if we let them out, he'll go after them again. Right. I wonder, Ben rubbed the back of his neck. The vacuum hose is pretty long. If we could get this truck to the hospital, we could push the relocation button and shoot the fairies through a window into the fairy lounge. Brilliant, Pearl said. But how? What's a fairy lounge? Victoria interrupted. She crawled out from under the truck and was trying to squeeze between Ben and Pearl. Pearl tried to ward her off with some sharp elbow jabs, but Victoria threw her weight into the battle and broke through. Those bees look weird. She was about to press her face against the glass. Fortunately, Ben was quicker. Oh, no, you don't, he said, snatching her glasses off her face. Hey, give those back, she complained. If you want them, come and get them. Ben jumped out of the truck. Then he waved the glasses, trying to entice her away from the fairies. It worked. Victoria chased him around the welcome sign. Pearl stood in the truck's bed. What should she do? She glanced through the truck's back window. The keys were still in the ignition. Could she drive the truck to the hospital? She'd never driven before, but how hard could it be? Okay, kids, time for you to run along. With his mouthful of licorice, Bug Eye curled the hose into the truck. Then he grabbed the driver's side door. Gotta take those nasty killer bees back to the shop to be exterminated. Pearl needed a distraction, something that would lure Bug Guy away. A yellow tennis ball rolled past the truck. Chapter 16 is called Cat at the Wheel.